Hello, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me. My name is Joel Keylor. I'm the CEO of Tresle. Today, we're going to take some time to provide a high-level overview of some of our most frequently asked questions as it relates to selling a small to medium-sized private company. Our mission here at Tresle is to enable businesses to change hands by offering the convenience of an accessible and elegant online platform that bridges buyers and sellers. This means new levels of transparency and efficiency to create a better way to transact for all. So with that, let's get into today's presentation on most frequently asked questions about selling a business. So to get started, what are the steps in selling a business? So the way we tend to visualize this is in three different steps: preparation, marketing, and closing. And each of these phases, if we want to think of them as phase 1, 2, and 3, they obviously have, sub steps and different roles within them. So on the preparation stage, it's all about getting the business and the seller aligned with what the market will likely command. So this means realizing the potential strategies, clearly defining the owner's goals, determining a range for value, seeing if there's areas where we can enhance value prior to the sale, and ultimately gathering and compiling information and data that making it easy to understand, organize, and simple. Next stage is marketing. So this is actually going out, launching on the market, targeting buyers, qualifying buyers, beginning to engage in initial conversations, and ultimately receiving offers and kind of getting our feet wet with terms and price. And the next stage is the closing stage. So this is selecting the acquisition party, providing support and allowing the buyer to access any information they need in their respective research, ultimately negotiating and signing a final and definitive purchase agreement, and then transitioning the buyer through post-close. So of course, there's situations when the transaction doesn't exactly follow these three phases. Example of this would be, let's say if there's an unsolicited offer. In this case, it would likely just be phase 3, or potentially a combination of phase 1 and phase 3. How can I know how much my business is worth? This is likely the most common question we get and one of the most commonly misunderstood topics. In the private market, a business is worth ultimately what somebody's willing to pay for it. However, one can look at recent historical data to nail down a range for price. With that in mind, there's several different paths and starting points that one can take to get to their valuation. Each of the following items that I'm about to go over are probably increasingly more data, therefore hopefully increasingly more accurate, and probably more costly as well. So number one, I think every business owner should have a basic understanding of how companies are valued. So, typically small private companies are expressed as a multiple of EBITDA. So earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It's an apples to apples comparison when you're looking at companies to judge their profitability. So this average in terms of valuation tends to be for small firms about 3 to 5 times EBITDA. So if the company is generating, let's say, $100,000, it can be expected to sell in the $300,000 to $500,000 range, for example. So not all businesses sell in this multiple range. Distressed or volatile businesses typically sell for less, and firms that have really strong, stable growth trends and, of course, have reason to continue such growth trends typically sell for higher. And there's various attributes that contribute to these multiples, such as location, scale, predictability of the revenue, and so on. Another thing to consider is online calculators. There's several various online calculators available to consumers, each with varying levels of complexity. So Tresle's business valuation calculator allows you to upload company attributes to produce a range for company value. Typically, we suggest that the calculator that we have at Tresle is designed primarily to serve companies with less than $2 million in sales. For larger companies, there's typically a lot more moving parts, and getting a professional valuation is likely your best shot. So that brings us to point 3, professional valuations. These are typically done by an appraiser or an intermediary who will take various standard approaches to value your company: income approach, asset approach, and market approach. And the fees associated with this can obviously vary dramatically depending on the scope of the work and ultimately the company's size. As a seller, you'll be required to submit company data. In return, the firm will do a deep dive on the industry, its current demand, and the company's specific dynamics to produce a valuation. Before kind of moving to the next slide, I just want to reiterate one point, that while historical valuations can be useful yardsticks, nobody has a crystal ball. The value of a business is ultimately going to be a function of the total number of highly engaged, truly qualified buyers that are brought to the table, and getting them to compete to understand your business, compete to be the next owner. And it's really only through this process that the true value of the company can be uncovered. Right. How do I know if my business is sellable? So the core answer here lies in determining the difference between being self-employed and owning a business. In other words, is there something to sell? Making money through a company doesn't necessarily mean it's transferable. Buyers want to buy a business, not a job. And determining whether a business is sellable is more of a gradient than it is an absolute answer. So here on the slide, we've outlined 4 kind of key areas. It's important to note that one area that is lacking could definitely be made up in another area. So one shouldn't be viewed as like an absolute necessity. However, let's go through each of them. So the team. Buyers are primarily interested in businesses whose success is not solely dependent on the owner's day-to-day involvement and their relationships. Sellable businesses tend to have some level of management that can run the business in the owner's absence. A good litmus test for this is to ask yourself as a seller, can I go on vacation? If so, how much am I being bugged? How much does the business decline or run into speed bumps with my absence? And that's a really, really quick and dirty test to see, am I essential to the day-to-day operations? The next thing here is scale. For the cost, does it make sense for the buyer to buy an existing business over starting their own? Further, if the buyer has to invest more than the purchase price to make the company achieve a reasonable return, it's likely not sellable or less sellable. Concentration. If the business has a single customer that makes up the vast majority of their revenue, this is called customer concentration, and it makes a business much more unsellable. There's significant risk by the buyer and their capital source if the loss of a single customer can eliminate the company and ultimately be devastating to the company and its stability. And last one is unique value proposition. Does the company warrant being sold or warrant a premium pricing? Does it have barriers to entry? Commodity businesses typically have low margins and derive low value. Next question, what are the main reasons some businesses don't sell? So of course, in addition to the items discussed in the previous answer and previous slide of what makes a business unsellable in general, what are some of the common, these are kind of some of the common reasons why businesses don't sell after being listed on the market. So in no particular order, starting, but in terms of importance, but starting from the top of our list, poorly priced. One of the number one issues why businesses don't sell is because they're not sellable for the price tag and of what the owner feels like they want or need out of an exit. So I like to give the example of you walk into a supermarket and bananas are on the shelf and they're $50. Well, that's a lot over market price. And, if you don't be surprised if you come back a week later and those bananas are rotten because nobody touched them. Nobody's willing to pay that price. Of course, the supermarket wants to get that price for it, but does that match market expectations? And that's one of the main reasons why businesses fail to get traction and are sometimes not sold. Similar to this, and partially tied to the above point, is unreasonable expectations by the seller. So this stretches beyond price. This goes in terms of being impatient with the timeline, training post-sale, their involvement post-sale, the terms of the deal. Typically, and it's not to the seller's fault. Typically, they've heard it from a colleague or a friend or read it somewhere, or they heard from a source that isn't in the industry of what they experience. But you have to remember, each deal is unique in their own way. So they're each going to carry their own terms, their own post-sale transition, their own timeline. And I think that if you hear these one-offs or hear these outliers, it sets unreasonable expectations on what is normal. Next thing, very few company policies and procedures are written down. Not only written down, but established. So this is kind of tying into the team element. When you, the seller, leave, are there processes? How are what is established in your culture? How are employee benefits and holiday hours taken into account, sick days taken into account? When that buyer is hopping into the driver's seat, are they fully aware of what's going on? Is their management fully aware? Are all these decisions ad hoc, kind of as you go, determining the procedure? So yeah, make sure that everything is documented, clear, and that the folks who are in the decision-making positions can truly make that. Financials are not complete or not accurate. This one's pretty obvious. If they're not complete, there's kind of room for fuzziness. And if they're not accurate, there breeds mistrust. So that needs to be taken care of. Access to buyers. You run into this sometimes, that folks will do a very localized search for their buyer. And, in this global age, in this digital age, we can leverage national searches and international searches. And I think that a lot of companies don't get the exposure that they need to give yourself the widest net possible and to give yourself the fairest shake at finding that person or that group that's going to buy the company. Next thing and last thing here are market changes. Perfect example that's recent in everybody's memory is COVID. If you're in the hospitality or restaurant or entertainment business in February 2020, just before the lockdowns, I'm sure there wasn't any issue with the industry and everything was going well, and you maybe just had your best year ever in 2019. Well, things change. And we see this all the time, is there are fundamental market shifts that make a business or an industry no longer desirable. And this can be temporary or this can be permanent. So I think this is a really good thing to to keep in mind is, I would say the number one mistake that sellers make, is selling too late, or wanting to sell too late. I always say fortunes are made by selling too soon. We don't know what's coming tomorrow, and if it's the right time for you, and we'll touch on that in a lower presentation, and sell when you're on top, then absolutely do it. Next topic: what are the costs associated with selling my business? So much of the costs associated with a transaction are largely dependent on its complexity. And all else equal, larger transactions are typically more complex and will command a larger dollar value. When we're talking about costs, it's important to note that buyers and sellers often look after their own legal, accounting, and broker fees where applicable. So kind of looking at this in three different ways. So legal, from the seller perspective, an attorney will need to review the definitive purchase agreement submitted by the buyer, and ensure all the final language is good to go and the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. Accounting can be very helpful in tax planning prior to the sale or immediately after. They will also likely be involved in due diligence processes. Buyers will be reviewing various financials in detail, requesting one-off reports and stuff of that nature. And lastly, here we have broker. Most brokers work on a commission basis, also known as a success fee. However, this is not always a flat percentage fee. There are sometimes scales, triggers, thresholds, minimums built into this fee structure. However, in order to break it down as simply as possible and compare apples to apples, we'll look at averages. So for transactions under 5 million, typically the fees range anywhere from about 10 to 12% of the final sale price. And for transactions 10 to 30 million range, broadly speaking, 6 to 8% of enterprise value is fairly common. And as the deal size increases, naturally the percentage decreases as you go up that scale. Also something to note is, depending on the size of the deal, many firms charge some sort of retainer or work fee to cover their marketing expenses. And this can range from a couple $1,000 to, on the larger deals, tens of thousands of dollars. For smaller companies, it's a little less common. And as you can see, that's a huge wide range in terms of costs. Hourly rates can be tremendously different for attorneys and accountants, as well as between brokers. But really here, you're looking at competency, and you're looking at who do you feel can bring you to a positive end result. How to know if I should use a broker or sell on my own? Great question. In short, it is absolutely possible to sell without a broker. It's known as a for sale by owner, or a FSBO. With enough research, hard work, commitment, you can transition ownership by yourself. However, keep in mind that selling is no easy feat. Be prepared to sacrifice time away from your business, normally spent running your business, and involved in the sale process, and this can come at a risk. There are situations where selling on your own is likely more plausible. And these are the following: a very small company. In some cases where the business is super small, the economics really just don't make sense to bring on a broker. It becomes very expensive. And on the broker side, there needs to be a little bit more of an upside for them to complete a sale. So it just doesn't really work out that way very well. The next thing is a serial entrepreneur. Perhaps you have a knack for creating and exiting businesses, and you've done it time over time, and you know it inside out. that's wonderful, and definitely want to leverage that knowledge. I would just keep in mind that I always like to say is, you know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. So each situation is different, and having somebody who does this day in and day out can be very, very helpful. The next thing is selling internally. Selling to somebody you know, such as a family member or trusted employee, can generally be done in-house directly without a broker. A distressed business. Unfortunately, this situation doesn't give you much of an option in choosing to go with or without a broker. Naturally, brokers prefer to work with businesses on an upward trajectory. I'll close by saying that brokers can be helpful, as they generally, have an expertise in a given industry and have experience aiding the sale of a small business, and good professional advice can't be replaced. Next question. How long does it take to sell a business? The quick answer is that it usually takes about 6 to 12 months to sell a business with professional help. However, keep in mind this is an average, and that there are many variables that can dramatically affect this range. So I'll just kind of address some of the key ones here. Number one, how promptly the seller provides information to the buyers or the brokers. Of course, if the ball is in the seller's court, it can literally be the roadblock between, moving forward to the next steps and getting a deal done. So that level of organization and speed in the process is essential to keep the ball rolling. Number two, how niche your company is. More common industries like, say, construction are easily understood by the masses, but businesses that maybe require a specific licensing can definitely impact timeline. Location. Your area can ultimately also determine how marketable your business is to buyers. Up and coming cities, resort-like locations are, let's face it, more desirable locations. So, that can definitely affect the pool of buyers that are potentially interested in moving to that location and operating that business. How your business is presented. So, how streamlined are your processes? How accurate do you keep track of your finances? How involved are you in the operations and outlining the procedures, kind of like what we talked about previously? If things are easy to understand in the buyer's eyes, things will move along faster. What documents will I need to show to potential buyers? So I like to think of a sale like a funnel. And there are different documents that will be required in different stages of this funnel. So for evaluation, typically speaking, you're going to be looking at financial information, physical assets, and taxes are the kind of cornerstone of that. And then, should you get an offer, the buyer is going to look a lot more at the company operations, the team, the benefits, any licenses that apply. And then ultimately at closing, it's going to be, in due diligence and getting towards that closing is going to be a lot more of a granular deep dive. We're going to be looking at environmental info, if that's applicable, any intellectual property, legal matters, material contracts, in-depth customer information, insurance. So as the deal progresses, there will be a need to supply more information. How do I keep the sale of my business confidential from employees, vendors, competitors, etc.? So in society in general, we're accustomed to being transparent and sharing the details about the items we're trying to sell. For example, you're trying to sell a used car, you see a sign on the back window that says, for sale, call whatever number, right? It's really easy to get sucked into that same mental model when selling a business, because ultimately it's you want to get the word out, and being private and opaque seems a little bit counterintuitive to most. Although retaining confidentiality is super important when you're going about selling a business. So let's kind of talk about the few things that we want to consider. So number one would be advertising the business listing using blind ads. So don't share the personal or business name until you have at least a little bit of information about the prospective buyer, and have their written commitment to confidentiality. Touch on this more in the next point. So creating a headline for a listing, for example, focusing on the nature of the business rather than its name. For example, full service car wash versus Coleman's Car Wash Incorporated. That's a really basic example of how to go about that. Number two, use a non-disclosure agreement. So as mentioned above, always have a written commitment to confidentiality prior to revealing any specific information about the business, its name, location, financials, etc. You could work with an attorney to produce your own agreement, or you can source a template online and adjust it to fit your unique situation. At Tresle, we have a whole suite of digital documents, NDA being one of them, that we have templated. So you can edit it to fit your unique situation and send it directly to buyers on our platform. Number three, avoid holding meetings at your place of business during hours of operation. Although it seems important for the prospective buyer to observe the company's operations in person, it's best to conduct these meetings after hours. Ideally, any meeting should be done off-site. However, you don't want word getting around with employees that the owner was meeting with somebody and they wouldn't tell who it was, and kind of rumor spread. And it's just best to nip that in the bud and do it off hours and ideally off site. Number four, don't share any proprietary information until you're working with a serious buyer. Remember, like we talked about before, the information is to be delivered in layers. So there's no situation where the buyer needs to know the business's fundamental processes, client lists, trade secrets prior to any sort of commitment in the buying process or demonstrating their ability to make a purchase. An offer or an LOI or a letter of intent, all kind of the same thing. It's typically a commitment that outlines the proposed term of a deal and the intentions of both parties to close the deal. So it's kind of advised to get to that stage prior to sharing your company's deepest secrets. Number five, include as few employees as possible. In some cases, it's necessary to get key employees involved. A serious buyer will want to meet with management as a part of their due diligence process, which is fine. But it's important to limit the numbers to an absolute minimum to avoid pitfalls, any of the pitfalls that I mentioned above. Number six, establish a private communication system to exclusively deal with prospective buyers. We've seen this before, and this is, where a seller, forgets that their staff has access to their company email. So, and therefore the word about their sale gets out. So it's best to be a little bit cryptic with your approach. Don't provide, an office number as the contact number, any shared access email accounts as your primary point of communication with buyers. It's just not advisable. If you're using a system like Tresle, all of our messaging is done inside the platform to ensure this confidentiality, and you can set it up with any email address or any Google or LinkedIn account that's more of a personal account in nature. Okay, next question. How do I know when it is the right time to sell? So the two-circle analogy is a great one that I always like to give. So on one hand, on the left, we have our valuation or the market price of the company. On On the right, we have kind of net worth, personal timeline and personal goals. Valuation is for the most part quite objective. There's a market price to something. And personal goals are quite subjective, whether it's the financial result that you would like, how long you wish to transition the company post-close, how much you'd like to meet your personal financial goals, what are your non-financial goals. So these, in a small private company, it's actually more of a Venn diagram. That there is an overlap between the company, which is likely one of the larger assets the private business owner has, and then all those other things that I just mentioned, their personal financial situation. Well, like I said, the valuation is pretty objective. There is a market price, but does that market price satisfy all these other goals, intentions, and wishes? I don't know. That's for the seller to determine, right? So the best thing you can do is educate yourself, understand that objective part, understand the valuation, and then does it meet your goals? Is this something that can get you towards retirement or to funding that next business, or just to have some money in your jeans walking around? That's really on the seller to determine. But having that realistic, objective, market-driven, scientific answer to the left-hand circle, the valuation of the company, that's crucial, and that will be your ticket to ultimately understanding if it's the right time to sell, as per the right-hand circle. Where can I get more information on how to sell my business? So deciding to sell your business is likely the second most important decision a business owner ever makes. The first is deciding to start it in the first place. And there's a million different resources and books on scaling and growing your business. But for what, right? Like ultimately, at some point, everyone exits. So, and unfortunately, there's very limited amounts of high quality information on selling and planning an exit. We get approached by clients every single day of myths, and they heard from their friend, or they talked to their brother-in-law or sister-in-law or what have you, and things, that kind of game of telephone happens. So at Tresle, we have a wide range of blogs, interview, downloadable content, webinars, all aimed at making the private market a little less private, whether you're looking to sell now or a few years down the road. So I'll give an example of this. Is we had a client that we recently onboarded, and I guess they had been following our blog and some of our content that we've been producing for a number of years prior to reaching out to us, and they had basically just landed in our inbox and said, hey, I'm finally ready to sell. I've educated myself. I've stayed up to date in terms of the content that you posted. I've read the checklist. I'm organized. I understand what I need to consider and why I need to consider it. And I'm now ready to make that plunge. So I would say that the time is now to start to educate yourself. And this is a great place to start in getting a lot more information. What is Tresle? Founded in 2015, Tresle is a platform and marketplace that enables buyers and sellers of small to medium-sized businesses to transition ownership. In our opinion, this means using technology to create and enhance personal connections, not replace them. So on the sell side, we actually have two solutions. We have the Tresle Marketplace, which is a self-serve platform where sellers can list their business, reach our buy-side audience, and seamlessly manage their sale from start to finish. Thousands of business owners and their brokers trust the Tresle Marketplace to manage the sale of their business with confidence. On the other hand, we have Tresle Plus, which offers select companies revenue size about 2 million to 100 million in sales, a little bit more of a hands-on approach. So this is our enterprise solution where each client gets a dedicated team to work alongside them and build out a strategy, build custom marketing materials, conduct research and industry analysis to market the company, to manage the due diligence process, beginning to end. It's kind of our full scale selling solution for larger companies. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into today's discussion. If you're looking for more information around buying and selling private companies, check out our tools, resources, and blog at tresle.com, Tresle.com. Further, if you have any suggestions or questions regarding future topics, drop us an email at hello@tresle.com, and we'll be sure to take a look. Thank you and take care.